Moment, everybody. Nothing like dropping your notes right after you go live. Amen. Okay, hey everybody, this is Brother Kyle Joe Hicks, or Brother Joe as most of you know me as, the director of Outcry Youth and Street Ministry in Detroit, Michigan, and also our little adventure that we're calling Operation Southern Souls, and that is mostly done during Bike Week and Biketoberfest down in Daytona Beach, Florida, as well as other trips we have down south, and primarily when we go to the homeless in downtown Jacksonville, Florida, and then to the bikers during Bike Week and Biketoberfest. I want to talk to you today, and I'm going to be putting this video out on redo this video three or four different times on different social media posts, and I want to talk to you about a man by the name of Keith King. And yesterday I went to the funeral for Mr. Keith Kelly King, who was the president of the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 when I first got involved with the Vietnam vets. And then also I'm going to mention quite often Mike Sand, who was another friend of mine from the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9, and I'm going to tag several other people in this video on the Facebook video, and then share this around a little bit. And I'm probably going to do a couple of different other platforms, TikTok and a few others, where we have video. I can't tag them all together, but I hope you understand this is a very important thing to me. I first met Keith King back about 2010 or 2011 down at the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 building when Bob Gillette, the owner of a couple of the American House businesses here in this area, invited me to come down. Bob Gillette, who was also a Vietnam veteran, began buying our ministry hot dogs and different supplies years ago, and we've been picking up hot dogs over there at the American House in Dearborn Heights for years now. And I went down and I met with Bob Gillette and Keith King. Now, Keith had no idea who I was, and that was right about the time the Westboro Baptist Church was protesting soldiers' funerals and all the stuff that they were doing, ridiculous junk that was going on back in those days. And I went down there, and here's this big old Bob Gillette took out his cell phone and say, "Notice what I'm doing, gentlemen." He shut his cell phone off, and then Keith was sitting across the table at it, kind of glaring at me. He didn't know who I was, and a Vietnam vet, and I'm sure there was some trust issues with everything, with anybody new and everything. And Keith was a very welcoming guy, but he didn't know who I was, and he just heard that I was a preacher, so he probably had some of his issues. And we got to talk, and I told him about all of our years in our ministry down there, and how that we had owned a building and held church services just one block away from the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 building that used to be the old Greenfields restaurant at Temple and Woodward Avenue. And anyway, let me get into this and get moving here a little bit quicker. Keith was looking at me, kind of glaring at me, and the first thing he said was, "Well, just how many times do you usually go out in the streets?" I'll reference this again at the end of the video, and I just told him as much as humanly possible. He kind of smirked and shook his head like he understood what I was talking about, doing this ministry of ours as much as humanly possible, because he was very, very involved in multiple veterans organizations, his own business. He at that time was the president of the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9. And so I met Keith back about 2010, 2011. Can't exactly tell you what date it was, but right in that time period, maybe latest 2012, but I think it was actually before that. And so anyway, we met down there via Bob Gillette. And I appreciate Bob Gillette completely so much, because years now they've been buying hot dogs and giving them to our ministry, which is a huge relief that we don't have to pay for that. And the American House and has been doing that. And Barb Barrel is involved with that, with my wife Lisa and all. And this has been over a decade now that they've been getting hot dogs for us, which, like I said, is a huge relief financially for our ministry. At the funeral, Lisa and I went up to the viewing Friday night and saw Dana, Keith's wife, and I met Amy, his daughter, and also his son Jeff. And so I went to the funeral yesterday, and I did speak for just a moment. I was not the speaker, and it was people just getting up and talking about Keith and the things that he had done and all. And then I saw Miss Dana, his wife, again, and then his son Jeff got up and said several things, and I'm going to kind of go through these relatively quickly because I have a lot of work to do today as far as putting this video out on several different platforms. I don't have them all interlinked, but Keith's son Jeff was also a veteran. He was a Gulf War vet. Said about his dad that his father was an advocate, an entrepreneur, a decorated veteran, and businessman. He was blunt. Talking about Keith, he was blunt, and Keith was honest. So he was an advocate, an entrepreneur, a decorated veteran, and businessman. He was blunt and he was honest. And he said the thing that he was most proud of, that his father was most proud of, was their family. And I can appreciate that, as well as all the other things that I could say good about Keith. He was a good family man. He loved his family. His daughter Amy got up after Jeff finished speaking, and she said that her dad, when they were just would tell them from their life. My dad used to say to me all the time when I was a kid, my dad would say, Joe, what are poor people supposed to do? My daddy was an old FDR Democrat. He was the old type of Democrat, and my daddy would say, Joe, what are people supposed to do? And that was always in my mind. And then at Rochester Hills Baptist Church and Stone Baptist, when I was growing up, Stone became Rochester Hills Baptist Church, they would always say, win the lost at any cost, and go to those, go to the worst, go to the poorest, go to the worst areas and stuff like that. And so I had this stuff going on my entire life. And so Amy got up there and said that her dad had said to them, we have a job to do in this world. And I can really, really, really appreciate that kind of thinking, that we're not here just for ourselves, that there is a job that we have to do. There's something we've got to get accomplished. Vietnam veteran Keith King was teaching his children from the time they were young, that there's a job that we have to do in this world. And then on top of that, she said, and I really appreciate this, she said that when her and her brother were 5 and 7 years of age, they got involved with the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9 building, and at 5 and 7 years of age, Keith had them doing jobs and chores in the building when they were setting that building up. And some of the other veterans said, Keith, let them alone. They're just kids. And Keith said, no, we want these kids to understand there's a responsibility and all this kind of thing. And those of you that knew our ministry years ago, that Miss Lisa and I had with our young people, we were constantly taking kids and teenagers and trying to lay a burden on them about the homeless folks, about soul winning, about street preaching, about feeding people, about putting boots on their feet, and trying to teach young people, you're not here on accident. There's something you got to get accomplished, that God wants you to do something, which I appreciate that. And that Keith had his kids involved at that age, and so it's no wonder they're still involved all these years longer, because they were taught by a good dad to do a good work for good people, to help folks out. All right, something else. She said that her daddy had a mission, and there were several people that got up and said things, so I hope I'm not ascribing things to that he said, she said, and all this kind of stuff. But another thing was said about Keith was that he had a mission. And having a mission, having a goal, having an objective, having a purpose in life is so important in this world. Something else, they said, we have a job to do in this world. He gave jobs to the kids when they were just 5 and 7 years of age to teach them responsibility, and there was something they had to do. And he was on a mission. He had a mission. And something else that Amy said about her daddy is that he loved his veterans, that he really, really loved the veterans. And if you don't remember those days and you're too young, and I'm going to be 65 years of age here in March, which is unbelievable to me, and I've been down in the Cass Quarter area since of the Cass Quarter of Detroit since I was 15 years of age, and that place has all been cleaned up and everything. But what was I going to say there? He loved his veterans. Okay. Keith was involved in trying to help people and trying to do for people. Jack Devine, one of the other members of the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9, and he told a story I'd never heard before. And Jack is a short fellow. He's about, I don't know, 5'5", 5'6", 5'7". And Keith was not short. Keith was a big dude. And I saw some pictures of him during the video that he was a tall, skinny fellow at one point in time. I never knew him as tall and skinny. I just knew him as a big, burly kind of guy. And Jack Devine said that he was in some interview at a radio station or a television station. I don't remember the call letters of the station, but he said, here this guy comes walking real fast down the hall right at him, saying to him, who are you? Who are you? And he said, well, I'm Jack Devine. And he says, who are you? And he said, after the third time, he says, who are you to tell me as a Vietnam veteran how I ought to feel and that kind of thing. And Jack Devine said, Keith, just come to the meeting, man. Just come to the meeting over there at the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9. And they said that Jack Devine says, well, I was the one that brought him in, but we kind of kept him. And then soon force of personality and his knowledge and his wisdom and everything like that, Keith King, they said he kind of took control. I mean, he had a mission, he had an objective. He had been a military policeman, so he was kind of used to telling other veterans where to get off and all that kind of thing. And during that time period, Keith also authored a magazine for Vietnam veterans called The Aftermath. And I saw copies of The Aftermath down there at the old Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 meeting, and it's too bad somebody couldn't get a hold of those things and reproduce those things or get them online or something. I don't have that kind of talent, but boy, that would be gold mine for the future with people. Like I said, Keith had been a military policeman. Keith had been the president of the Vietnam Veterans of Michigan. And when I first went down to the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9 and met with Keith and Bob Gillette, Keith at that point in time was the president of the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9. He kind of glared at me at first, and then we got to be kind of buddies right off the bat when we kind of started comparing notes. And I told him, I am not like Westboro Baptist Church. My daddy is a veteran. My whole family, I'm chock full of vets. I love my country, love my flag, love my veterans, love their families, and all that kind of thing. And Keith was always good to me. After day one, he was good to me. And several things that were said about Keith. And the thing about it is, this little video, and if I sat here and tried to type out all the acronyms and that kind of thing, I would not do a good job, because Mike Sand, Keith King, and several of these other men are involved in dozens of different organizations, and they've given their lives since 75 or whenever they got involved in these different organizations. After the Vietnam War was over, they gave their life to make sure that the next group of veterans, the next war, would not have to go through what the Vietnam veterans went through after that war, that conflict we had over there in Southeast Asia. Someone else said about Keith that he was passionate. And passionate just makes things more fun. And passionate, sometimes you run out of passion and you run out of zeal and you run out of those things because you go through things and all that kind of stuff. But if you're going to stick at something, it might as well be enjoyable. It might as well be good. It might as well be kind of fun. And passion does change the flavor of things that you're trying to do, for sure. After I met Keith King, right off the bat, he tried to help me. And I honestly, I should have, I was a much more bashful person back then than what I am now. Even though I was a street preacher and stuff, I was kind of intimidated by that gentleman as an individual, and I didn't feel up to snuff and all that kind of stuff in a lot of these situations, because I'm not a veteran myself. And I told when I spoke yesterday up there at the funeral for just a moment or two, I told everybody, my daddy told me, if you join the military, I'm going to kill you myself. He was in North Africa in several amphibious invasions around Italy, and he just said, it's nothing like everybody says it is. And I can remember one time Keith in a meeting his voice kind of crackled, and he got a high pitched sound in his voice when he said, "Combat changes a man." And there's a lot of wheelchair armchair quarterbacks, and a lot of folks that think they know something and want to be involved in all this kind of stuff. And veterans have actually been there and said, you may not want to be involved in a bunch of this stuff that you think you wanted to be involved in. And I'm talking about combat and warfare. Keith, first of all, said to me right off the bat, like I said earlier, number one, he said to me, "How often you're out in the streets?" And he was really concerned. "What are you doing? How are you doing?" And I explained it to him. He says, "Man, that is fantastic." Right off the bat, he said, "You can use our building, the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9 building. You could use our building for your youth services." And at that point in time, if I remember right, we were still meeting at the Springwells Avenue Baptist Church for one service, and then we were going down to Taylor Center Baptist Church for a second service. So first of all, Keith asked how many nights a week are you out in the streets, and then he offered us to use the building for the youth ministry. And then later, early on, and this was going to come back under Mike Sand, that he said, "You can store your stuff here, the clothing, in the basement of this building." They had a huge basement downstairs. He says, "You can take the stuff down there," and they had a concrete ramp that we could have put the bags on and boxes and just slid it down into the basement. And I wish I had held some of our youth services there. I wish I had stored some of that stuff down in the basement even earlier and got even more involved with the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9 earlier than I did. Mike Sand became the president, and I don't remember what year that was, but right off the bat, because of some of the problems I'd had with our Detroit area Outcry Youth and Street Ministry Board of Directors, also known as Brother Joe's Youth and Street Ministry, I wanted to be, if I was involved, I wanted to do something. And so I started talking to Mike Sand right off the bat, and we built a yellow and Vietnam flag colored board on a wagon, a piece of plywood painted bright yellow with the green and red stripes, with a black helicopter on the side that was the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9's logo. Put it on a vegetable cart and painted it kind of a military green, and then they used it for their parking lot there at for the Tigers and the Lions and everything when they were parking cars there at the lot. They still are, but that wagon's no longer in existence. But maybe I should redo one of those things. Amen. But I wanted to be involved. And let me get off of me and get back to this thing about Keith and Mike. And so a lot of things that we did there, and I had told him one time about some issues I'd had with some of our board of directors, because I noticed that the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9's business meetings were nothing like our ministry's business meetings at all. And everything just kind of got deflected. I'd bring up ideas and people would bring up ideas. Well, it was always up to Brother Joe to do all these ideas, and nobody was offering any help whatsoever. And so I noticed how that the Chapter 9's meetings were not like ours. And Keith knew 501c3 organizations. He knew nonprofit organizations. And I asked him some questions one time, several times, but one time in particular, he got a little confused look on his face and then got squinted and kind of got mad. He said, "Brother Joe, who told you that?" And I won't tell you who told us that, but a lot of bad legal information, if I'll just leave it at that. Just things that should have never happened and was not being done right. And I was kind of a dummy and just fell into all this stuff. But I gained some wisdom from Keith King, from Mike Sand, other Vietnam veterans down there. I'm not a Vietnam vet. I'm not stealing any honor or anything like that. But I learned some things from these guys. And something else about all this stuff. During what I called Camp Wet Vet, that later became Detroit's infamous Tinseltown, Keith wrote me an email one day and said, "Brother Joe, I just want to let you know something. homeless people become more aggressive as things go along. I wanted, honest to God, ladies and gentlemen, I really wanted to, there were several veterans down there living at Hart Plaza. And I told everybody, here's the tents, and we gave them several tents. And I told everybody, here's what you need to do. Every morning, when you get up, pull your tents up, put them in your backpack, and take them off down the road. Well, that worked for a week or two, and then some of the old vet dudes left, and then other homeless people started moving into these tents that were not veterans, and they did not have any kind of structure the way some of the veterans did because of boot camp and everything, and it went crazy. It got so bad that Mayor Mike Duggan walked right across the street from his office, and one of our guys down there who overdosed and died, his name was Andrew. Andrew was one of the guys down at Tinseltown a while later. Andrew did end up overdosing and dying, but Mayor Mike Duggan went over there and said, started asking some questions, what's this all about? And Andrew asked him, Mayor Duggan, do you have a plan for the homeless? He said, oh yeah, I have a plan for the homeless. But 2 or 3 days later, the police were sent in to remove Brother Joe's Camp Wet Vet. And a bunch of them grabbed their tents and went on down the road to Lafayette Park, and they set up, and everything was fine until the following fall when all the leaves went away, and it became an international incident. Honest to God, it was rough. And that never was my intentions. I was just, and Keith warned me, they're going to get more aggressive, and they did. Keith also said, I said to him one day, I apologized to him that I did not get involved and start volunteering to help him out more, and I didn't even feel worthy to help these guys, you know. And he said, Brother Joe, that's okay. Now you are. And that's after Mike Sand became the next president down there, and I helped Michael, like I said, with the that cart, and it was a big, pretty thing that we threw together, and I was really grateful to even be able to do that. And then we cleaned out the basement at Chapter 9 and painted the walls downstairs and painted the walls upstairs. A bunch of folks from the church came down there, and some other volunteers came down and helped. And our crew that we call the Adorkables, I had several. They're adorable and they're dorks, so I called them the Adorkables. Some of the older boys came down there and helped me tear things out and clean things up. After we did all that work down there, one day after a Vietnam Vets Chapter 9 meeting, Keith King and Mike Sand said to me, Brother Joe, we want to talk to you after the meeting. And I thought, oh boy, I did it now. What did I do? And I'm trying to figure out, you know, how I messed up. And Keith and Mike said, Brother Joe, we want to know would you be our chaplain at the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9? Now, I went down there to honor the Vietnam veterans. All my life I've wanted to do something to show honor for those men because the way that they were treated after the Vietnam War, which was terrible treatment of our soldiers. And so it was an honor for me to say, yes, I'd love to do that. And I can't say that I'm really good at it, but I'm there for what needs to be done anyway. And that I really appreciate that, and I'm really getting to the core of the story here. Keith would always joke around about how he found me wandering around out in the streets one day, and he said, so I brought him in, which is kind of humorously, it is kind of the way it was, but Bob Gillette had me come down there and meet them, and boy, I'm still raw and wild as all get out, even in my 64 years of age right now, but I was really out the window back then. And I appreciate him bringing me in. I'm appreciating him letting me hang around. Appreciate Mike Sand putting our ministry to work to help it for this cause. I mean, it did me some good. It really did. I remember one time Keith said to me about he had a thing, I think it was called the Veterans Coalition with the city of Detroit. And he said to me one day, he says, Brother Joe, they took my group away from me, the city did. I don't even know if they have a Veterans Coalition or anything like that right now. Maybe they do. But I could tell it kind of bugged him that other people get involved with things, and then they not only don't do what they're supposed to do or do what they say they're going to do, they also kind of axe you out of things. And that'll bug a guy that wants to get something done. And I could tell it kind of irritated him, as it should have. And here's the bottom line of this whole story, and I've hopefully set this up a little bit like a court case or something. Maybe I should have started with this first, but I didn't, because here's the whole punchline. Back in October of 2013, I made a phone call, and it was one of those infamous, that's sunlight, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, on my face there. October of 2013, I made a phone call to a man who was the head of the group that I was working with out in Westland, and I asked this fellow, all of our stuff, we had a ton of stuff stored in a building out there, and I said to him, famous last words, right? Miss Lisa and I are getting ready to go down to preach at Biketoberfest back in 2013. Going to go down to Daytona Beach and preach to the bikers down there and do street ministry down there. And I asked him, I said, there's no way in the world that this building is going to get sold while we're gone, brother. And famous last words, brother, don't worry about it. You'll have at least a month. And so I was under the presumption that I would have at least a month. And then when we got back, I was given the announcement that everybody that had stuff stored in this building, including our ministry, that you have 5 days to get your stuff out. And ladies and gentlemen, we had about the equivalent of a Walmart store stored inside that building. Clothing that I had washed, some of it, bagged up, men's jeans, women's jeans, hoodies, coats, sweatshirts, boots, shoes. I mean, putting winter stuff up in an upper attic, carrying it all up there and think that. And I get back after I was told you will have minimum at least a month if the building's sold, to being told the building was put up for short sale and you got 5 days to have your stuff removed. No place to take it, no anything. So, foolishly, I kind of lost my mind and ran around and started bagging stuff up. No, it was already bagged up. I started taking the bags from upstairs, sliding them down into carts, carrying them down the stairs. And my poor wife was working at her job, and then she'd come there at nighttime and try to help me. And she made this statement to me, I've never been so tired in all my life. She goes, I don't know how you do this. And I said, well, it just needs to be done. And so from early November, and it took longer the 5 days. The 5-day cleanup was for what do they call it? A test and examination. I'm drawing a blank. When you go to sell a piece of real estate, they examine the building. I don't think that's the right word, but they inspection. They were doing an inspection, and so we had enough stuff cleaned away so they could do the initial 5-day inspection, and I just started dumping everything I had. I had nothing else I could do with it. No place to go, no nothing. And then we got rid of all of our stuff, and cold weather hit. Man, I was so brokenhearted. That would have been going into December of 2013 and January of 2014, and it was so bitter cold, and we had nothing. I mean, all the supplies, everything that I had to get rid of it, because I was told, yeah, you'll at least have a month, and I had 5 days plus a little bit of wiggle room to get rid of everything. And so I got rid of everything, and then cold weather hit. Now, I was so desperate, I didn't know. I honestly remember walking into the side of that building one night thinking, I'm done. I'm just finished. That was 2013. I'm kind of soft-hearted and tender-hearted, and I was crushed. I had no idea what to do. And so I thought maybe because Keith had offered me some space in the basement before, I got a phone call while we were getting rid of all this stuff from Adam Summers over at the Faith Baptist Church in Chelsea. Brother, we have an entire garage full of boots and military surplus stuff that they had bought from Government Liquidation, I think was the name of the business. GL, yeah, Government Liquidation Incorporated. And we went out there and they had a garage full, good-sized garage, filled with hundreds of pairs of the Mickey Mouse boots, the white winter boots that the military uses, shooters, mitts, gloves, hats, you name it, man, they had tons of stuff. So we went from having tons of stuff to having to dump all of our stuff. Then all of a sudden I've got a bunch of stuff again, and I had no idea what I was going to do with all this stuff. And so, long story short, I went to Mike Sand, and I said, Michael, is there any possibility? And Michael said, I'll bring it up to Keith and the rest of the Vietnam Veterans Board member. And they went and talked, and he got a hold of me, and they gave me, and I'm going to start bawling. They gave me a key to the building. They gave me the code to the building. They trusted me enough to let me work out of that building. They gave me a front office, and we had so much stuff out there at that church, I couldn't bring it all downtown at one time. But we started doing our basic work out of that front office, and we just crammed that thing full to the rafters of military boots, the big bunny boots, all kinds of gear. We gave some of it out there, and then later we held an event there at the Vietnam Vets Chapter 9 and just gave an entire their main meeting area where the restaurant used to be. Thing was just packed with all kinds of stuff, and people from other organizations came down. People came in off the streets. We just helped people all over the place. And I was in such desperate shape. I remember thinking, I'm done. God's done with me. I don't know what to do. And Michael Sand and Keith King and the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 literally, I'm getting choked up thinking about it again, saved our bacon. I mean, I absolutely could not believe they trusted me that much. And I absolutely could not mean... I went down there to try to honor those men. I did not go down there to try to get anything from them. And then all of a sudden, I was the one that was in bad shape, and I was the one that needed help. And just like that, they let me store that stuff down there. And that was still in the cask order when there was a little bit of the old cask order still left. We were able, I can remember a couple of nights going into the front of that building where those guys were in there in the main area playing cards and doing whatever they were doing, and just having fun together. Some of the board members, or some of the some of the organization's members, anyway, they literally saved my ministry's bacon. I've been talking to Lisa. What would we have done had Chapter 9 not stepped forward? And I guess I would have tried to rent some storage units, I guess. But during that time period, for about the fourth or fifth time, I had to get rid of almost everything that we had collected as far as clothing. I had to get rid of vehicles. I had to tow vehicles out to my buddy's farm out in London, Michigan, out there by the race course, way out there. Thousands of dollars worth of tow bills and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And honest to God, I lost everything. And standing there kind of in the ashes of our ministry, wondering what's going to happen. And while we're cleaning up, I get a phone call. We got a ton of stuff from Adam Summers, Pastor Adam Summers out there at Faith Baptist Church of Chelsea. We got a ton of stuff out here for you, Brother Joe. And they did. I mean, you should have seen that garage was packed to the rafters. And so thank you, Keith King. I'm sorry for your passing. You were my friend. I had not seen you in ages. And thank you, Michael Sand. Thank you to the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 Board of Directors and their membership, because they sure did me right. They sure did me right. And I appreciate you. Love you all. I would be remiss if I didn't tell a whole bunch of people there was a man by the name of Keith King who was a tough old Vietnam veteran, military police, combat vet, was in the mud out there in Vietnam, and he years later, the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 9 of Detroit, their building was in the Cass Corridor, which is where our ministry was. Our old building that we had on Cass Avenue, you could walk right straight out the back door and run right straight into their building, just from Cass, across Park Avenue, walk about half a block away, and I'm telling you, our buildings were back to back, about a block away from each other. They were in the Cass Corridor, ladies and gentlemen. That speaks volumes. And so anyway, I love you guys. Love you, Keith King. Love your family. Love you, veterans. Love you, Michael and Bobby Sand. Love your families. And I love our veterans. And I can't say enough about, there was a man named Keith King. And that old boy and Mike Sand saved my bacon. I'm telling you, I was in dire shape. Our ministry, as far as I'm concerned, was basically just about over back in 2013, going into 2014. But thank God they came through, and I appreciate it. Appreciate them. Appreciate my friends allowing me to store some stuff in different areas. But boy, we took a hit, and they sure did come through for us and help us out. All right, my nose is about ready to start leaking, so I need to get off here. All right, love y'all, Brother Joe. I'll talk to you later. No, thank you, Susan. Appreciate that. Okay, things are good. Love y'all, Brother Joe. Sign out. Bye now.